Aaron Glenn continues to show that he gets it by how he handled the Breece Hall trade rumors. But now the tough part of his job is about to begin. That and more today on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Monday, June 16th, 2025, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. A big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday, and today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. On today's show, we have some Jets news to break down. Our illustrious owner is apparently trying to expand his sports empire into the United Kingdom. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about the latest updates on Jets position battles as the offseason program ends, and we look forward to training camp. But we will begin by talking about Jets head coach Aaron Glenn, who was in the news last week. Of course he was in the news. The Jets had their mandatory minicamp. It was the final portion of the offseason program. The Jets ended their camp late last week, and now they won't practice again until training camp begins. And Glenn was speaking to the media each day through training camp, but there were some words Breece Hall had at the end of training camp that really stuck with me. Now, if you were following the Jets heading into the NFL draft, there was a lot of talk about the team potentially trading Breece Hall, and it wasn't really based on reporting that the Jets were seeking out a trade. It was more just speculation that maybe the Jets would draft Ashton Jeanty in the first round. Jeanty was the top running back in this year's class, or at least viewed as the top running back in this year's class. And if they did, maybe they'd trade Breece Hall. And that's what happens around draft time. There's always speculation. But this rumor, which wasn't really a rumor, started to pick up steam. And Breece Hall said that, he heard the rumor. And he started wondering what was going on. He said, I was seeing it just like everyone else was seeing it. But people feel like if you're not doing your job, you're going to be replaced. It didn't happen. And then he mentioned that Aaron Glenn called him. And he said, Breece said, at first I was like, okay, we'll see what happened. And then AG called me and he told me, he's like, Breece, do you think I want to trade you? And Breece replied, I don't know. He said, and Glenn replied, Breece, I don't want to trade you. I want you to be here. You're going to be our running back. So that felt really good. So this is a situation that was very well handled by Aaron Glenn. Again, like there was very little to suggest the Jets were interested in trading Breece Hall. This is just like, sometimes like people just kind of speculate on stuff, and there's nothing wrong with speculation. I mean, look, I do it here, but this was something that it was never really established that the Jets had any interest in trading Breece Hall. It was all just like, well, maybe if they draft Ashton Jeanty, and it didn't really feel like the Jets were interested in drafting Ashton Jeanty. But like how things circulate in the media these days. And we've seen this firsthand with the Jets. Sometimes a player starts hearing his name in trade rumors, and even if the trade rumors aren't legitimate, it upsets the player, and it causes a rift between the player and the team. And I think that Aaron Glenn reaching out to Breece Hall just to make it clear they weren't trading him is the type of thing that will make sure that doesn't happen between Breece and the Jets. Now, as Breece mentioned, you've got to produce. And one thing that's clear at this point is that, the Jets haven't really begun negotiating a new contract with Breece. They've begun negotiating a new contract with Sauce Gardner. They've begun negotiating a contract with Garrett Wilson. It's also notable both Sauce and Garrett have 2 years left on their contracts. Breece is entering his contract year, and there have been no indications that the Jets have initiated an extension discussion. So there's no guarantee that Breece Hall is going to be here in the long term. In fact, a lot of that's probably going to be dependent on how he plays this season. He's coming off a season which was not terrible, but I don't think was up to the standard we'd expect from Breece Hall. And as we talked about a lot on the show over the last couple of weeks, the number of explosive plays he produced was cut in just about half. Now, part of that's the Jets weren't throwing him the ball as much as they were in 2023 because they had Devontae Adams for 3/4 of the year last year, so they had 2 good receivers to throw to, versus 2023 where they really only had 1 good receiver, so the running backs were more involved in the passing game. But Breece wasn't the same guy he was in last year that he was through his first 2 seasons. Breece also did indicate that he was playing through a knee injury late last season. And I'm always a little skeptical of that because he was like, if you're on the field, you got to produce. If you're that injured, you shouldn't be playing. But you're watching the film with Breece, there's something off with him, and I couldn't quite figure out what it was. And now, like hearing that him say that he was playing through something last year, it just makes more sense to me because I just couldn't like quite figure out what was going on with Breece last year. You'd watch the film, you'd see something wasn't right, and the fact if he was playing through an injury, that actually I think explains a lot of his drop off in the big play production because Breece has never been a guy that's been all that consistent play to play. He's always been kind of a home run hitter who hits a lot of home runs and strikes out a lot, but there weren't as many home runs last year. So, that I guess, that if he was playing through something that may explain why he didn't hit as many home runs last year. But ultimately, I go back to Glenn reaching out to Breece Hall, being proactive. That's the type of thing you want from your head coach because it's the type of thing that prevents a player from losing trust, losing faith in the organization. And it prevents bad blood from being created. If Breece Hall felt like the Jets were going to trade him, I think future contract negotiations, if he has a good 2025, would become more complicated because sometimes a player, and we've seen this with the Jets, you probably know the examples we could cite. If we could start with Jamal Adams, which of course it was probably good the Jets did that. It was probably good the Jets traded him. But you could go down the line where a player ends up in trade rumors and it just sours the relationship between the player and the team. You don't want that to happen. Now, the other thing I'll say is that I think it was good that Aaron Glenn did this, but it's also worth noting that the task for Aaron Glenn is going to get tougher ahead in the weeks and months as we move forward, because up to this point, we've really been only able to judge him on things that are important, but don't determine whether you're a good head coach or not. He hasn't coached a game yet, so we can't judge him on in-game strategy. We can't judge him on game plans. All we can judge him on are like these soft factors, how he handles these situations. And I think he's handled a lot of them really well. I think he handled the Aaron Rodgers situation well as the Jets decided to move on from Rodgers. I think they first of all made the right decision, and second of all handled it really well. And then, another situation, and there have been a lot of these that have popped up through the offseason. He diffused what could have become an acrimonious situation between Breece Hall and the team by just reaching out to Breece saying there's nothing to these trade rumors. And you want to see your coach be proactive in a situation like this. But really, these are the things that only matter if they're used to build a winning team. If you get a player to trust you and he buys in and then produces and helps you win games, that's where it makes a difference. If the player, if you reach out to the player and the team stinks and the team doesn't win games, it doesn't really matter. So the way I view this is not that, when I praised Aaron Glenn for how he's handled something this offseason, it's not that I'm sold that Aaron Glenn's going to be the next great coach in the NFL. The way I view it is these are situations that were in front of him that he handled well. And by handling those situations well, he's put himself in a position to reap the rewards in the fall. But whether or not he's a good coach will ultimately come down to whether or not he does take these situations that he's handled well and use them to his advantage and use the new trust between Breece Hall and the team and get results from it and win games. The easiest time to be a head coach is that first offseason after you take over, because you haven't done anything worth criticizing. You never had a bad game plan. You never made a bad in-game decision. You never made a bad challenge. You never wasted a timeout. There's nothing to criticize you on. And for the fan base and the media, you're kind of a blank slate. They can put whatever positive attributes they want to on you because you haven't proven them wrong yet. I like a lot of what Aaron Glenn has done this offseason. But now that the offseason is nearing its end, the tough task begins. And look, there are some coaches that can't even get this part right. Adam Gase was one of them. I mean, we knew very early that it was very unlikely Adam Gase was going to be successful because he never handled situations like that. He didn't develop relationships with players the way Aaron Glenn did with Breece Hall. But now here comes the tough part. It's taking the good moves that you made in the offseason and turning it into results in the autumn. And that's something we'll keep our eye on as we move forward. Now, here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we actually have a few indications on where position battles may go. There have been some reporting from the Jets as they closed out their minicamp, and these are the position battles we'll want to keep our eye on heading into training camp. A position battle update as we continue here on this Monday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Game Time. The NBA Finals are here. The intensity, the buzzer beaters, the fans losing their minds. It's the kind of atmosphere you want to experience live. And this year's matchup is delivering. And if you want in Game Time, it makes it fast and easy to get seats. Prices on the app actually drop the closer you get to tip-off. And with killer last-minute deals, panoramic seat views, and no surprise fees. Game Time is a total game changer. Very exciting NBA Finals between the Thunder and the Pacers. If you want to go, Game Time's the place to be to get in on the action. But if you can't make it to Indiana or Oklahoma City for the NBA Finals, there are so many other things Game Time offers: tickets to comedy, theater, you name it. You want to go see baseball, you want to get a head start on the Jets season, Game Time's got you covered. I use Game Time myself. I love their all-in pricing. Here's how it works. There's no surprise fees when you check out. You see exactly what you're going to pay. And when I've used Game Time for tickets, I've always been impressed because they give you the view from your seat before you buy, so no surprises. You see what it's going to look like. It's the best place to find your tickets. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL, LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen or first watch every day. A big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. The Jets conducted their mini camp last week. It was the final phase of their offseason program. By all reports, the Jets had 100% attendance. Now, the mini camp is mandatory. It's the only part of the offseason program that players have to go to. If players don't attend the mini camp, they can be fined. The Jets last year had two very high-profile players who missed mini camp for two different reasons. Hassan Reddick was holding out for a new contract, which lasted well into the regular season. Aaron Rodgers missed mini camp because he timed a vacation to Egypt wrong. He essentially thought the Jets mini camp would be a week earlier, and he wanted to go to Egypt, so Rodgers missed minicamp, and the Jets fined him. This year, there was 100% attendance at minicamp. This comes after roughly 90% attendance through the entire voluntary portion of the offseason program. Before minicamp, there's a long offseason program that kind of starts off as like basic conditioning, weightlifting, and then ramps up. Eventually, you get closer to like genuine practice scenarios near the end of the offseason program. But those are all voluntary. The team can't do anything if a player doesn't attend. Jets had about 90% through most of their offseason program. And the mini camp, you don't want to read too much into the results. But one of the things I discussed last week on an episode as we were getting ready for mini camp was I wanted to see a preview of the position battles the Jets would have during training camp and get a sense for where people stand. And Rich Cimini of ESPN wrote a column on Sunday where he kind of laid out where some of the key position battles are at the moment. He said Josh Reynolds is the clear-cut favorite for the number 2 wide receiver job ahead of Allen Lazard, whose name will continue to circulate in trade rumors now that Aaron Rodgers has landed with the Steelers. If the Jets decide to move Lazard, a big if, it would not happen until the end of the preseason, but only if they're comfortable with their receiver depth. So some good insider information from Rich Cimini. It sounds like Josh Reynolds has a leg up in heading into training camp as the second wide receiver. Now, of course, that can go away. And I think if you're the Jets, you're hoping it will go away because Josh Reynolds has been a receiver. He's a veteran receiver. He's been around the league for a while. He's had some seasons that were pretty decent. This is a guy that's in his 30s. He's a guy who didn't really produce a lot last year. And a guy who, like, even on his best day, is not somebody you really wanted to count on as your number 2 receiver. Even when Josh Reynolds was at his best, he was a guy who was better served being your number 3 option. And I view like Josh Reynolds winning this job as probably like a worst case scenario for the Jets. And the way I look at it is when training camp begins, you're going to have like a 7-week stretch where a young guy's going to have an opportunity to step up. And the Jets don't have any highly drafted young players on their roster, and by highly drafted, I mean guys who were drafted, round 1, early round 2. Malachi Corley was drafted top of round 3. Arian Smith was drafted relatively early in round 4. Then you have Xavier Gipson, who was a non-drafted free agent. I think the hope has to be that like one of those young guys steps up. And I'll be honest with you, that's my hope. I don't have a lot of optimism about that, though. I mean, I think Gipson really didn't show much improvement between year 1 and year 2. And when that happens, you can always hope for improvement between year 2 and year 3, but usually it doesn't happen. When you talk about Corley, he's been banged up through much of the offseason program. And I think that's a bit unfortunate because I'm a bit of a skeptic about like the offseason program actually mattering for players. But one exception I would note are guys who are very raw, who are looking to develop. guys who are kind of project type players, because I think whenever they get an opportunity on the practice field to work on their technique, it's a benefit. And Corley apparently missed a lot of time during the offseason program. And he was a guy who, was a really big project when the Jets drafted him a year ago. Even looking back on it, it was a very curious pick. The fact that the Jets drafted a guy who was very, very raw as a route runner, as they had a quarterback who was maybe the most demanding of his receivers running proper routes in the league in Aaron Rodgers. And the result was, Corley caught 3 passes all season. He was a total non-factor in the offense for the Jets. In a way, like, even though you should keep expectations relatively low for third round picks, if you look at the recent history of guys drafted in that range where Corley was picked, usually they do more than he did. So I don't have a lot of faith in Corley. And then Arian Smith, who, by all accounts, is actually looking pretty good during OTAs. Maybe he can break out. But you never want to bet on a rookie 4th round pick having a big impact in year one. It's one of those things. It's a nice surprise when it happens, but it's not the type of thing that you can really depend upon. But that's kind of the situation the Jets are at receiver. We talked about heading into the offseason how the Jets were not going to be able to fill all of their needs. And there were going to be areas that were not addressed in a satisfactory way during the offseason where they were just going to have to hope something goes right. And wide receiver is one of them. Samini also noted the sense is that the battle at center, Joe Tippmann versus Josh Myers, will continue into training camp. One positive for the offensive line, the starters got plenty of work together in the spring. It's a departure from last year when injuries / veteran rest were a factor. And so, lots to go there with there. I've been pretty vocal. I'm happy that there's a competition. I think that the teams, to their own detriment, leave entrenched starters in positions and just hand them too much. I like the idea of having competition because it's just better when you have to compete for your job. Even a guy who established himself as a good center like Joe Tippmann, I don't think there's anything wrong with bringing in a competition and saying the best guy plays, because you should always be looking to improve your team. It doesn't matter if you're happy with what you've got at a position. Teams should always be looking to upgrade, and teams should always be looking to push their guys to be better. Give Joe Tippmann. Joe Tippmann's a professional. Like, I'm not saying he was lacking motivation, but I think it's always good to have that extra motivation pushing you. That said, I think from what we saw last year, Joe Tippmann does seem to be a better center than Josh Myers has been through his career. Myers maybe has like a slight leg up because he played with Justin Fields in college, although Fields got most of his snaps from the shotgun in college. So there hasn't been like there wasn't really many true under center exchanges between Myers and Fields. But I would view it as like a negative if Myers won the job, because I do think Tippmann's better. So I do think Tippmann's better. So if like Myers won the job, either Tippmann kind of regressed or the coaching staff got something wrong. So, it's one of those things where I liked Myers signing. I like the fact the Jets are pushing Tippmann. And I think that Myers gives the Jets something that a lot of teams lack, and that's depth on the offensive line. Who has depth on the offensive line? Most teams are like one injury away from being in a catastrophic state up front. The Jets are not on the interior. Tackle, it's a little bit dicier. It depends on what Chukwuma Okorafor is able to do. But I think Josh Myers gives the Jets very solid depth on the interior. And my hope is that Tippmann, continues to grow and develop. And if he does, he won't have any problem taking the job. And, Sabini's last point is that the offensive line's working together. I think that there's benefit to that. I don't want to overstate these like practices during the off season, because I think a lot of them happen at kind of like half speed from what I understand. But it is true. Like last year, the Jets offensive line did not have a lot of chemistry. And this year, you have a lot of guys who have worked together playing next to each other. Olu Fashanu and John Simpson may not have, played a lot next to each other last year, but Fashanu did get some starts at left tackle near the end of the season. Simpson and Tippmann and AVT. These are guys who that interior of the offensive line played together last year. They've developed chemistry, and then the new right tackles Armand Membu. Working with Elijah Vera Tucker and at least getting a head start on figuring out how to work together. I think that's the type of thing that's a positive. That on the Locked On Jets podcast. I hate to do it, but we got to talk about the owner. Woody Johnson's in the news, and he may be expanding his sports empire. Oh boy. We'll talk about that as we continue here on this Monday edition of Locked On Jets. This is the Locked On Jets podcast on this Monday. We now turn our attention from the recently completed Jets offseason program to news that broke late last week about Jets owner Woody Johnson, who apparently is trying to expand his sports empire. He apparently has put in a bid on an English Premier Soccer club, Crystal Palace, which is based in South London. Johnson is bidding over $200 million to try and buy the team. Now, if you remember, a couple of years ago, Woody actually attempted to buy Chelsea, which is another English Premier League soccer club. And I can't help but think back 2 years. Some of you may remember during the summer of 2023, and I talked about this a little bit on the show. I was in Europe because I had a family wedding. My cousin got married in Greece, but I decided to I had a little bit of time off. So I decided, I decided to make it a couple weeks trip. And as you may know, flying directly to Greece from the East Coast of the US is pretty expensive. But once you get into Europe, you can just fly. It's very inexpensive to fly from European city to European city. So my sister found this discount French airliner. So we got a cheap flight from Newark to Paris, spent a couple days in Paris, then went over to Athens, went to this town Nafpatkos for the wedding. Fantastic wedding. Really fun. Then I decided on my way back to the US to stop in London for a couple of days. And I flew out from Greece on a Sunday. Now, most of the English soccer games take place on either Saturday or Sunday. I really wanted to see an English Premier League match. So I landed Sunday night. All the matches were completed by that point. There was one match on Monday night, the Monday that I was going to be there. And it was a Crystal Palace home match against Arsenal, which is another club from London. So I went down to Crystal Palace. It's in South London. Really interesting city. It's a very interesting stadium. The stadium is actually built in a residential neighborhood. Literally there's houses right across the street from this stadium. It's very old stadium. The fans were great. I mean, if you ever been to an English soccer match, the fans sing through the entire game. It kind of puts us to shame as American sports fans, to be honest with you. I mean, the refs blow a call and the fans immediately spontaneously break into this song where they criticize the ref. I mean, that's the atmosphere you get at these English soccer matches. Arsenal won the match 1-0 on a penalty kick. This was August of 2023. If you want to look the match up, it was like the later part of August. But I looked around. These were great fans. As I understand it, Crystal Palace is kind of a long-suffering fan base. Really fun atmosphere. The team clearly with strong local ties, a very loyal fan base. And I think back to that night, and I remember these people that I saw that just love their team. And it's if only I could have warned them that Woody Johnson could be coming. And it's amazing to say, because it seems inconceivable that Woody Johnson could know less about a sport than American football. But I'm sure he knows less about American football than he knows about English soccer. And we've seen what destruction he has wrought the New York Jets. Now, I hope for these Crystal Palace fans that this deal falls through and they don't have to deal with Woody Johnson. Because again, these are just great fans. I was in their stadium. It was a really old stadium. Fans who've been through so much hardship. And, I feel a kinship with any fan base that's gone through hardship. Nobody deserves to have Woody Johnson as their owner. And I can't imagine how destructive Woody Johnson will be. And here's the thing about English soccer. You can actually get kicked out of the league if you finish in the last 3 spots. If you finish in the bottom 3 spots in the standings, they actually drop you down to a lower league. And you have to earn your way back up the next year. And if Woody Johnson owns this team, it's a virtual guarantee Crystal Palace is going to get relegated. Because Woody Johnson will run that team into the ground. But I wanted to talk a little bit about how this could impact the Jets. And you wonder, if Woody's attention is divided and he's focusing on destroying Crystal Palace instead of destroying the Jets, could this be a good thing for the Jets if he's distracted, where he can't make dumb moves, he can't order his people around, he can't make all these crazy decisions? Maybe if he's doing it at Crystal Palace, and again, as bad as Woody Johnson's been in the NFL, it's tough to imagine how much worse he'll be in a sport that he somehow knows less than American football. Now, maybe this is wishful thinking. Maybe he'll just put his brother in charge like he did when he was the ambassador to the UK between 2017 and 2021, in which case, will just be a different brother who's running the team into the ground. But I'm trying to look for reasons for hope around the New York Jets. And the biggest obstacle to that is the ownership. So maybe Woody is, maybe Woody's going to focus on destroying an English Premier League club. Maybe that, and I'm really sorry if you're a Crystal Palace supporter. Again, for your sake, I hope it falls through, because you guys are great. I was at your stadium 2 years ago. Now, here's the other thing I wonder, and this is not so polite. I'm sure a lot of people won't say this, but I'll be the impolite person who mentions this. In the NFL, it doesn't matter how badly you run your team, you make money. It's just like the economics of the NFL, because you get this, your costs are fixed because of the salary cap, your revenue is guaranteed because of the TV deal the league negotiated. If the Jets were a normal business, they would have like gone out of business a long time ago. This team would have gone bankrupt a long time ago if Woody Johnson ran this team as a normal business. In the English Premier League, you're not guaranteed to make money. You actually have to run your team effectively. And there actually has been precedent of sports teams owners in America who went to the English Premier League and lost a lot of money and ended up having to sell their American sports teams because of the damage they did financially. There was this club, Liverpool, which is one of the most storied clubs in England and Europe. And about 15, 20 years ago, they had these two American owners, George Gillette and Tom Hicks. George Gillette owned the Montreal Canadiens in the NHL. Tom Hicks owned the Texas Rangers in Major League Baseball and the Dallas Stars in the NHL. And they ran Liverpool horrifically. And they ended up like really losing a lot of money, to the point where they had to sell their American sports teams. And I mean, I wouldn't rule that out with Woody Johnson. He's an awful businessman. I mean, he doesn't know anything about anything. So, from a Jet standpoint, like, maybe this is like the type of thing that like distracts Woody from destroying the Jets. Maybe if he's focused on destroying the English Premier League team, something, the Jets get off the radar and the football people are allowed to like run the operation. And I can't rule out Woody running an English soccer team so poorly that, they lose money and maybe he has to sell, or maybe he gets into English soccer and maybe he, decides he's bored with the NFL. After you've had this much success in the NFL, you probably have other worlds to conquer if you're Woody Johnson. So maybe, I don't know, like, I'm really reaching, but I'm hoping that like this means less Woody around in one way or another. And I think it's certainly possible. We'll keep our eye on this Crystal Palace situation. It's one of those things like, as a Jets fan, it may not be good, it can't be bad for the Jets to have less Woody Johnson around. For Crystal Palace fans, who a great fan base that suffered, I'm sorry, guys. I hope for your sake it doesn't happen. So we'll keep our eyes on this as we move forward. But that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show or listening on a podcast source, please give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. It helps us out and helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Tomorrow, we're going to reflect on the first quarter century of Jets football since the year 2000. And we'll have some flashbacks to the greatest wins and worst losses. I'll look forward to talking with you then.